If you or your spouse wore a military uniform before the 1990s, stick around for the next few minutes because there's a benefit tied to that service that a lot of veterans and their families never end up claiming. Not because they don't qualify, but because nobody ever sat them down and explained it clearly. Today, I'm going to walk you through three things. First, who actually qualifies for this VA pension benefit based on when and how you served. Second, the mistakes that cause otherwise eligible veterans and surviving spouses to get denied or shortchanged. And third, a detail near the end of this video that most people miss completely. One that can make the difference between a modest monthly benefit and one that actually covers real expenses like in-home care or assisted living. This isn't hype, and I'm not going to promise you a guaranteed dollar amount because your actual benefit depends on your income, your medical expenses, and your household situation. What I'm going to do is give you the real rules, straight from how the VA actually evaluates these claims, so you can figure out where you stand. Let's start with the basics, because this is where most of the confusion happens. What we're talking about is called VA pension, sometimes referred to as veterans pension, or if you need help with daily activities, the aid and attendance benefit that gets added on top of it. This is different from VA disability compensation. Disability compensation is for injuries or conditions connected to your service. Pension is different. It's a needs-based benefit for wartime veterans who are now either age 65 or older, or who are permanently and totally disabled, and whose income and assets fall below certain limits. That distinction matters a lot because some veterans assume that if they weren't wounded in combat, there's nothing available to them. This benefit exists specifically for veterans in their later years who served during a recognized wartime period, whether or not they ever saw combat. Now here's where the served before 1990 detail actually comes from. And I want to be precise about this because a lot of headlines simplify it in a way that leaves people confused. The VA defines specific wartime periods that make you eligible: World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam era, and the Gulf War era. To qualify for pension, you generally need at least 90 days of active duty service, with at least 1 day falling during one of those wartime periods. You do not need to have served in combat, and you do not need to have been stationed in the war zone itself. If you were on active duty anywhere in the world during one of those windows, that service can count. The reason so many people who served before 1990 fit this picture is simple: the Vietnam era and the years right after it. Before the Gulf War officially began in August of 1990, cover millions of veterans who are now well into their 60s, 70s, and 80s. But I want to be fair here. This isn't a hard cutoff at 1990. If you served even a single day during the Gulf War era, which started in August of 1990, you can still qualify too. So don't rule yourself out just because your service extended past that date. One of the biggest misunderstandings I see is veterans assuming their income is too high to qualify. The VA doesn't just look at your gross income. They let you subtract certain unreimbursed medical expenses, including things like Medicare premiums, prescription costs, in-home care, and assisted living fees, before they calculate your countable income. That means a veteran who looks like he makes too much money on paper might actually qualify once his medical bills are factored in. I've seen cases where a widow was told by a well-meaning neighbor that she made too much to bother applying, when in reality, once her assisted living costs were subtracted, her countable income dropped low enough to qualify for a meaningful monthly benefit. So don't self-reject based on a rough guess. The actual math is more forgiving than most people assume. Before we go further, if this is helping clear things up, go ahead and hit like on this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It genuinely helps more veterans and families find this information, and I've got more of these breakdowns coming that dig into VA and Social Security rules most people never hear explained plainly. Now let's talk about surviving spouses, because this is another area full of confusion. If your spouse served during one of those wartime periods and has since passed away, you may be eligible for what's called survivor's pension, sometimes called death pension. The eligibility rules mirror the veteran's pension in many ways. There are income and asset limits, and the deceased veteran's service has to meet those same wartime service requirements. A lot of widows and widowers assume that once their spouse passes, any benefit tied to that service disappears. That's often not the case. In fact, some surviving spouses end up qualifying for aid and attendance themselves if they need help with daily living. which can significantly increase what they receive each month. If you're a surviving spouse and nobody has ever walked you through this, it's worth getting your specific numbers looked at because this is one of the most overlooked benefits in the entire VA system. The VA does look at your net worth, which includes your assets plus your income, but your primary home, one vehicle, and personal belongings are generally not counted against you. Where people get tripped up is with things like second properties, investment accounts, or large amounts of cash sitting in savings. There used to be a lot more flexibility here, but the VA tightened its net worth rules a few years back, and now there's also a 3-year look-back period on asset transfers, similar in concept to how Medicaid handles look-backs for long-term care. That means if you gave away a large sum of money or transferred assets specifically to qualify, and it falls within that 3-year window, it could delay your eligibility. This is exactly why I always tell people, don't try to rearrange your finances on your own right before applying. Talk to an accredited VA claims agent or a Veterans Service Officer first, because a wrong move here can cost you months of eligibility, and those services are typically free through veterans service organizations. Here's a mistake I see constantly, and it's an easy one to avoid. Veterans apply, get denied, and just give up, assuming that's the final word. In reality, a huge number of initial pension denials happen because of missing paperwork, not because the veteran was actually ineligible. Maybe a DD-214 wasn't attached, maybe medical expense documentation was incomplete, or maybe income was reported without the medical deductions factored in. If you were denied in the past, especially years ago, it's worth revisiting that claim, because the way medical expenses and net worth are evaluated has changed over time, and circumstances that disqualified you before might not disqualify you now. Now here's the detail I promised you earlier. The one that tends to get missed even by veterans who've already looked into this. Aid and attendance and housebound benefits are not the same thing, and a lot of people don't realize they can only receive one or the other, not both, but the eligibility criteria are different enough that some veterans qualify for one and mistakenly apply for the wrong one. Aid and attendance is for veterans who need help with basic daily activities like bathing, dressing, or preparing meals, or who are largely bedridden, or who have significantly limited eyesight. Housebound is for veterans who are substantially confined to their home because of a permanent disability, even if they don't need hands-on help with daily tasks. Here's the part that surprises people. You don't have to be in a nursing home or assisted living facility to qualify for aid and attendance. If you're living at home and family members or a hired caregiver are helping you with daily activities, that can still count, and it's one of the most underclaimed aspects of this entire benefit. Veterans living independently at home, getting help from an adult child a few times a week, often assume that only nursing home residents qualify. That assumption alone keeps a lot of eligible people from ever applying. I also want to address the dollar figures you might see thrown around in videos like this one, including in the title of this video. Numbers like $2,200 a month are realistic examples of what a veteran with a spouse and significant medical expenses might receive once aid and attendance is added to the base pension, but your actual number depends entirely on your specific income, medical costs, and dependents. The VA publishes updated maximum annual pension rates, often referred to as MAPR, and those figures adjust periodically. Rather than relying on any single number you hear in a video, the reliable move is to check the current published rates directly on va.gov or confirm your specific eligibility with a Veterans Service Officer who can run your numbers for free and tell you exactly where you land. So let's bring this together. If you or your spouse served at least 90 days of active duty, with at least one day falling during a recognized wartime period, and for most people watching this, that means World War II, Korea, Vietnam, or even the early Gulf War era, and you're now 65 or older or permanently disabled, you may be sitting on an unclaimed benefit that nobody ever told you about. The biggest mistake isn't failing to qualify. It's assuming you don't qualify without ever checking. Income limits are more flexible than most people think once medical expenses are factored in. Surviving spouses often qualify even when they assume the benefit ended with their spouse's passing, and living at home doesn't disqualify you from aid and attendance the way so many people believe. If there's one single action to take today, it's this. Contact an accredited Veterans Service Officer, which you can find for free through your county Veterans Affairs Office or organizations like the VFW or American Legion. and ask them to run a pension eligibility screening for you specifically. Bring your DD-214, a list of your monthly income and your medical expenses, and let them tell you exactly where you stand instead of guessing based on rules of thumb. You've already given this country your time and your service. Taking 20 minutes to find out what you've earned in return is more than worth it, and I hope this video gave you a clear, honest starting point to do exactly that.